Oh no, here we go. I do have it. There we go. Very good. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep, all good.
Right. So the key for us was making knowledge visible. The problem with knowledge when it comes to especially operations people like Adrian is they're used to dealing with tangibles. So, you know, trucks, stations, buildings, you know, stuff you can pick up and throw, you know. So getting leaders to think about something soft and intangible like knowledge is really hard. And just like dealing with other things we can't see, like the state of Victoria or whatever, it's just too big, you draw a map, right? So what we tried to do is to draw a bit of a map. Just start with a bit of a story. A couple of years ago, I was working for a medical technology company, and we had a washing machine that washed sharps containers. So the sharps containers would come back from the hospitals, and this robot would empty them and then wash them, and then they go back to the hospitals to be refilled again. And every 12 months or so, we'd put this little thing. It was it's about the size of a fluoro marker, I think, and it was called a bio strip. And it had basically bugs on it, you know, little bacteria. And you'd put it through the washing machine, and we'd monitor the pressure, the temperature, the water flow rates. And at the end, the little strip would come out, and we'd put it in the incubator and on petri dishes, and we'd try and grow what was left on there. And that would tell us if the washing machine did its job, what's called a 6-log kill. Only one bacteria in a million left remaining. And so from that point on, if we want to know if the washing machine was doing a good job, we didn't put another strip through. We just used the computer to monitor the pressure, the water flow, and the temperatures of each of the 5 stages of the wash. And the engineer explained to me, this is a parametric. It's, you know, there's no way we could put strips through every day. We want a way to always know that bin was clean. So if there's ever an infection in another hospital, we can track it back and know which hospital it came from. So we were tracking each bin with barcodes. It was really cool stuff. So when we were talking about making knowledge visible, I thought maybe we can use a parametric or two. And so that's where this idea was born from. How can we know how much knowledge our 50,000 members have? And so just a bit about the CFA. We have 2,872 staff. That's a bit less now after the reform. 53,000 volunteers over 5 regions around Victoria, 21 districts, and 1,219 brigades. And just in case you're wondering, 53,000 is a big number. Victoria is the 3rd most dangerous fire state in the world. Southern Spain is number 1. California is number 2, and we are number 3. And the reason for that is you'd think it'd be hotter up north, right? The thing is, it's hot, but it's wet. So even though they have a lot more vegetation up in northern New South Wales and Queensland, the vegetation doesn't dry out like it does here. So we have a lot more what we call fuel on the ground. And that's why we need such a massive fire capability in the state. The average age of people in those volunteers is 49 years old. Average age. I've got a guy down in Bensdale that did 42 call-outs last year. The guy's 79 years old on the back of a truck. Our volunteers are the most amazing people you ever meet. Average tenure is 20 years as a volunteer. And that blows me away as well. A really, really incredible bunch of people. The peak tenure is about 5 years. So that's the most common tenure, if that makes sense. So it sort of peaks at 5 years and then dribbles out to, oh, geez, some people have been around 60 years in the organisation. We have 2,340 fire trucks in the form of tankers and pumpers for house fires and tankers for bushfires. And in 2019, we responded to 48,800 incidents. So they were house fires, car crashes, people stuck in drains, bushfires, you name it. In terms of knowledge at CFA, We have 21 districts, and each of those districts is broken into groups of between sort of 6 and 16 brigades in each group. So we have on-the-job mentoring. That is absolutely massive. We have a huge training component. In fact, we're one of the largest registered training organisations in Australia. A lot of people don't know that. But we also, this on-the-job mentoring is outstanding. And I'm happy to say that in my 2 decades of knowledge management experience, I've not seen this level of collaboration and knowledge sharing at the local brigade and group level anywhere in any organisation I've been in. It's absolutely amazing, and all ground up, organic, relationship, trust-based knowledge sharing. It's amazing. You cannot stand still in a brigade for more than 5 minutes without somebody teaching you something. It's really incredible. So the problem starts to occur when you go from brigade to brigade, and then, of course, from district to district, and the knowledge sharing really drops off. Part of the reason we do it so well is because we're brilliant at face-to-face and phone calls. And the problem with that is the second you can't see someone anymore, you stop talking to them. And we have that, in the state. And so I wanted to understand where the knowledge is. The polite way to call this is centres of excellence. The other side of that coin is we have pockets of non-excellence, if I can put it that way. So the trick for us is where are these trouble areas in terms of our knowledge and experience. So my job is to help with whole organisation learning, and that includes lessons learned, incident investigation programs. We have an amazing lessons management team. And we've been working with people like Marv Cuthbert at the national level and AFAC level, trying to not just get better at it ourselves, but encourage others to do it and try and be sort of practice leaders in that area. We have great after-action reviews, right down up to big incidents and right down to the back of a truck after you've done an exercise. So it's good to see that happening. But here's the question. Imagine if you could manage your people by moving from linear, tangible metrics to simple, intangible metrics that reveal the depth of expertise and know-how in your organisation, ones that could even show trends into the future. And there's the question. That's what we're trying to solve here. How do you make a metric that measures an intangible? And so I'll show you a bit about it. How do you make visible knowledge? Well, if we look at a chemistry problem, DNA, you've got all these very, complex little amino acids that make up our DNA. But when you look at them on a picture, they make a lot more sense. And in fact, the relationships in 3D were what Watson and Crick came up with to better visualize it. I mean, they knew the chemical breakdowns of DNA years before Watson and Crick. What came along with those two was they revealed the structure of it, and therefore how it splits, how it becomes RNA, all that sort of stuff suddenly made sense because they had a map of it. And so much so that Adam Rutherford said, the publication of the double helix structure of DNA has been described as a turning point in science. Understanding of life was fundamentally changed and the modern era of biology began. And so these are big, I like to be aspirational. This is the sort of change I want to make to CFA, something that they look back and go, wow, when Stuart French turned up in 2020, that was when we suddenly understood ourselves. So there's knowledge, risks and concerns. So we're focused on measurable resources and skills over actual expertise. We want new insights and ideas that are not being broadly utilised. We wanted to look at different practices across the state, and heavy reliance on personal relationships and competencies was a real hallmark of the CFA knowledge culture. Managers have a fatalistic view of knowledge. And what I mean by that is, and it's well justified, when you're sitting, like many of us are, in front of a computer, in an office environment, we've got access to our phone, our internet, the Google and the internal systems. It's nice and comfortable. When you're wearing an inch thick suit about to walk into a burning house to save a couple of kids, you don't have access to any of that stuff. At that point, you have what's wetware, what's in your head. That's what you walk into that house with. You can't Google something while you're standing anywhere near that house. And so there's this tendency of CFA managers to focus on manage what you have on the day. Whatever we've bought here, that's what we've got. Don't waste time worrying about what we missed out on. If there's something else we can call in, call it now, but we act. We're here to save lives, not to do this right. And so safety, that's why if you're anywhere near CFA, you'll hear safety, 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 because that's something that we constantly have to pull into the forefront of our minds. And the fact that we got through the Black Saturday fires, worst fires impacting house and lives lost in Australian history, and CFA didn't lose a single firefighter in those 3 days, which I just think is absolutely amazing. But we also have a loss of hard-earned expertise. And part of the danger of it being a volunteer organisation is that sometimes, I'm sure you guys have realised this, sometimes we don't value what we haven't paid for. And if you turn the whole of the state's volunteer firefighters into paid firefighters, it would be far in excess of $800 million worth of wages a year. And Victoria gets that for free. Just think about that for a minute. Almost $1 billion worth of labour for free every year. So when somebody moves on, because we haven't paid for it, we don't think much of it. You know, they've been around 45 years and they get cancer and they go away, or they have a divorce and they think, oh, I'm going to change what I'm doing, or whatever. Identifying that expertise before we lose it is really important. So my objectives were make it visible, show that it's dynamic and can't be taken for granted. So you can see this isn't just reporting. I'm actually trying to influence and educate the leaders of CFA on how they understand knowledge as an actual asset that we are required by law to manage. That's the job of a director, is to maintain, create, maintain, and exploit the assets of an organisation to the best of their ability, right? And so if knowledge is an asset, then how then do we do that? And thirdly, show that it correlates with capability on the ground. It's not some theoretical thing. It's not just classes done by people, but it actually can limit the application of our tangible assets. It's no use having 5 trucks if you've only got 4 people to drive them. One stays in the station. And so I would argue it's just as important as our tangible assets. So we decided to calculate a bit of a knowledge score. Remember I talked before about metrics. What we did is we sat down with the different groups of people. We sat down with the IT people and the business intelligence people, and we looked at what data was available on our people. And it's just impossible to sit down and do a knowledge test with 53,000 people. That's just not going to happen. What we do have is we have everyone's role history going back to 1906. We know everyone that was a captain, that was a lieutenant, that was a training officer, that was a safety officer. We've got them all. We know the turnout history since 1990. We know who went to which fires. We also know a bit about those fires and what happened. We know what training people have done. We know what courses they've been on. And we also know what their current qualifications are, whether they have first aid or breathing apparatus or the many qualifications that people can hold. So we add all these together and we calculate a score for each individual fire person. And we add those up then for each brigade to get a total score for each brigade for each year. I hope this makes sense. So we're not calculating some grand score. We're calculating hundreds of thousands of little scores for each individual person over time, and then we add those up for each slice of time. And that gives us a bit of a picture. So this whole thing was written in SQL, badly, but I can do a bit of SQL, so that was good enough to get it going. That's then fed into Power BI, which then generates the various views of the data. And we did this as a proof of concept. We went out and spoke with about we spoke with 3 districts and 12 brigades to ground truth the data. We sat down with the captains and lieutenants of those brigades and we said, this is what the system's saying about your brigade. Can you confirm these are the big knowledge holders, these are the, low knowledge holders? Does the data represent reality? And we got a bunch of feedback for that. And that resulted in a change request being made in about February this year to fix a number of things that weren't quite right. Now, what you're going to see tonight is the old version. The new version has now been delivered, but hasn't, only at the code level, hasn't been rolled into Power BI yet. So I can't show you the new stuff yet, but you'll get the idea of what we've done. So this is the first view you get, and at a brigade level, you will get a list of firefighters in that brigade, starting on the left with the person who knows the most, who has the highest knowledge score in this year, and to moving off to the right with the lower knowledge score holders. You can see there I've overlaid it with 2 lines. The red line is the number of turnouts that person did this year. So you can see their highest knowledge holder was also the person who did the most turnouts, who, as it turns out, is also the captain of that brigade. He's a bit of a legend in his own lunchbox, actually. He's quite an amazing guy. The blue line is their age. So you can see there's a 64-year-old that did over 60 turnouts this year. Some of these people blow my mind. We've got what's that? Looks like about a 72-year-old that did 120 turnouts. So these guys are phenomenal, unbelievable. So the other thing you'll notice there is some of the lines are a lighter green. Can you see that? And what that means is those people haven't been on a truck in a while. So that the third highest knowledge holder there holds a lot of knowledge. He scores over 200, but he hasn't been on a truck in 4 years. And one of the bits of feedback we got when we ground truthed this was that the way it calculated the knowledge was really good. The problem is when people stopped turning out, and they were still a member of the brigade and they turned up and made sandwiches every now and then, or they did the fundraising or whatever, but you would never trust them on the back of a truck anymore. And so we wanted to show that, and we wanted to reflect that. So part of the feedback is that third guy there, they would not rate him as the third highest knowledge holder in the brigade, just because he's been out of the job too long. He's forgotten a lot of what he knew. And so in the new version, we now decay their knowledge. Once they stop turning out, we have a decay factor on their knowledge over time. And that takes that into account. Any questions about that?
Michael, did you have a question?
Yeah. So in terms of that decayed knowledge, how has that solution come upon? As in, was it based on just the feeling, or was it based on some sort of data that you got from people? Maybe they came back from a hiatus and made a mistake or got hurt or something.
Yep. No, good question. It was based on the feedback from the actual brigade lieutenants and captains. And the key, remember I said at the start, this was very operationally focused. So the key thing, the question I asked them is, in terms of knowledge, who would you most trust in your organisation? Yeah. And so that's what revealed these people that we were showing too much trust for them, that we were attributing too much knowledge to them in terms of their trustworthiness of being able to lead a team, or be one of the things this can be used for is to find resources to sit in an incident control center during a large event. We pull in people who are sort of advanced volunteers and local staff members who understand the local area, who have what we call local knowledge. And most of these guys are known, but every now and then it's good to be able to have a bit of a metric to say who would be a good person to bring in on this. And this tool allows you to look at a whole district and say, show me the top 10 knowledgeable people for this district. And some of those shouldn't have been in the top 10 because they haven't been active for so long. So that was how we adjusted it.
We have a question from Ian in the chat. Do volunteers see or review their own ratings? In other words, what's the access level for the volunteers?
Yeah, no, this isn't for distribution to the volunteers. I have shared it with several captains, and we may look at doing that, but this is primarily for the ACFOs and the commanders, because what we're trying to do here, and I know we're showing individual knowledge scores, but this is really about what's our aggregate knowledge. From a knowledge capability perspective, we need somebody in the brigade who knows first aid. We need somebody in the brigade who can drive, and somebody who can handle a bushfire, in a certain part of the district. Not everyone needs to have that knowledge, and so we're really looking at the key thing here is, because remember I mentioned before there's this massive mentoring thing going on. And so one of the metrics I'm looking at here is called a knowledge window metric. So every truck that goes out, I look at the people on the truck, I look at their current knowledge scores, and I compare the highest knowledge score holder on the truck with the lowest knowledge score holder on the truck. And that difference is my knowledge window for that truck. And so I might get a brigade that has an average knowledge window of 10. And that tells me that they are sending all the old experienced people out on the first truck and all the newbies out on the second truck. And nobody's learning anything. And then you'll have something which will have an average knowledge score of 80. And I know that they're mixing the old guys and the young girls up together. Yeah. I know, because of the mentoring, I know there's huge knowledge transfer happening at that brigade. And that tells me that brigade future health is looking good.
That's so cool. Hamza, you have a question. Hamza, did you have a question? No, he's lowered his hand.
Yes, I do have a question.
Oh, yeah?
So I have two questions. So the first one is that how are you calculating the decay factor? Like, are you using any simple mathematical formula for that? And the second question is, when you're referring to the knowledge of the brigade, so there are, as you have already mentioned, there are multiple knowledge areas here, like, first aid knowledge, bushfire knowledge. So how are you going to rate it? Like, for example, ideally on a truck, you need to have experts that have the accumulative knowledge should be good. Like, for example, somebody who knows about the first aid, who knows about the how are you calculating that, like differentiating between these different knowledge tracks? So these are the two questions I have.
Yeah, they're good questions. So I'll answer them separately. So the first one, decade of knowledge. So basically what we are doing, and here's the specification, is we are decaying based on factors. And we introduce a decay that is what we did in the new one is we went from yearly updates to monthly updates. So the commanders had a lot more granularity, a resolution to knowledge, so they could try, say, a new training method, or they could try a community of practice across all the first lieutenants or something, and then they could watch this change. Yeah. So I wanted to be a better tool for the commanders. And what we do is each of the factors there, you can see here. So have they done their hazardous trees training this year? Have they done entrapment drill this year? Are they still participating in other training courses? And have they got any current qualifications? So if they don't have any of those, then it's a 4.2% decay per month. If they have one of those, then it's a 2.3% decay. If they have two, then it's a 1.7. You get the idea. The more of those things they do, the more we know they're still active and the less we decay their knowledge. Now notice it's a percentage decay, and that creates a logarithmic decay. So they never, you know yourself, you still remember stuff from the first job you ever had, right? You don't remember the details of it, but you still remember, you never totally forget. So we didn't want like a linear decay. It had to decay slowly over time, quickly at first and then receding. So that's how we did that. Secondly, one of the things we removed in the new version is tracking at the individual skill or vocation level. It was a good idea to try and say, well, what about show me the knowledge of all our drivers in this district or this group? That was the idea. When we pulled the data together, that didn't prove to be that useful, and it made the algorithm on the back end really, really complex. And it also caused a technical problem with the decay. It meant that people with more than one role actually decayed faster. So we didn't want that happening. So as a result, we've gotten rid of the roles in the latest version. It may be something we look at again in the future, but right now we just want to know generally what's the whole knowledge score and which brigades are in trouble. Okay, so we'll jump over to our next one. I hope that answered your questions there. So we've got member knowledge, turnout count, and age. Right, so another thing is the curve. So notice the curve of the green lines here. This is a nice healthy curve for a brigade. In this center section here, you've got potential lieutenants for days. This is a brigade that's going to have ongoing succession planning and leadership for many years to come. If I switch over to the next brigade, you'll see the curve is a lot steeper. You've got a really, really concave curve there. And if you lost these top 4 people in the brigade, this brigade is close to dead. It would have trouble running a Tuesday night training. And so we talked to them about this curve in terms of their health moving forward. And so you can see the difference in the curves there between the two brigades. Obviously, the top one's a larger brigade, but it's not the size of the brigade that matters. It's the steepness of that curve that we want the commanders to take notice of. Right, so the next one is the brigade knowledge journey, and this is the one that I'm excited about, because when you show this to a captain, that their jaw hits the floor. See, to you and I, I'm going to show you this now, but to you and I, this graph shows a bit of data. But I had one captain who said to me, oh my gosh, this is the story of our brigade. You can literally see the story of our brigade. He was so excited that someone was showing him what he thought only brigade members knew. And so what this shows to the horizontally, it shows the number of members in the brigade. Vertically, it shows the aggregate knowledge score of that brigade. And so this is animated in the system, and I'll give you a quick look at this in the system in a minute. But this is animated, and you can actually see it grow and see the little dots move around. I'm sure you know how to do that in Power BI. But this was a winner. I mean, this really captures the leader's attention. The big circles, by the way, are the years where there were a captain change. And I'd like to point out for you to notice the change in knowledge direction when a captain changes. Now, I'm a student of history, and I am not a subscriber to the great man theory that great things only happen when one great man turns up on the scene and saves the day. I love Churchill. I'm amazed by the impact that Hitler had, but I think there was a lot more going on than just those two people. But this does show that leadership plays a key role. And I'm happy to report that, where it's the case and where it's not the case. So the way we do, what this highlights is the importance of our succession planning at CFA. And maybe in the volunteer world, the great man theory does apply more. I'm not sure. But this is the sort of data we need to ask and consider those questions, right? And the key thing is who those people are. So in Power BI, I can hover over these circles and it tells me who the captain was, which is handy for someone like Adrian who maybe is across 250 brigades and doesn't have the time to remember every individual person. This allows him to cover an immense amount of ground in a short afternoon looking across. So this is 1972 for this brigade, Pomona Brigade. And in 1993, you see a big turn in the knowledge graph. You'll notice that there was a big drop off there in member numbers. They went from 110 odd members down to less than 50. And yet you'll notice that the grade is not very steep. They lost hardly any knowledge, even though they lost half of their members. How can that be? Well, that's a good question. And I asked that question. And it turns out that in the late 90s, we had a thing called minimum skills come in. And that did two things. It insisted that all our firefighters have basic training before they're allowed on a truck. And I would guess that is one of the major impacts on our safety record today and why CFA has such an amazing record here. But at the same time, it meant a lot of people left because they were, some of them were like, oh, this is too much for me. I'm just a casual member. And we lost a lot of our casual members. Other people said, I've been fighting fires for 20 years. You're not going to tell me and I don't already know. So they left as well. So we had a bit of a cleanup, but it didn't affect our knowledge this much. And, there were people lobbying at the time, you're killing CFA, we're losing so many members. But the data shows we didn't lose much knowledge through that period, which is awesome. Then you see some growth here. New captain came on and bingo, we start building up our knowledge. We had 2 captain changes here and you can see the little donut as we had a couple of members leaving. I would suggest that some of these were old oaks. We had a couple of people pass on. Where this becomes dangerous is where the data seems to say when you lose a couple of those old oaks at the same time. That's the killer. And when we looked at some of those, a strange thing popped out. A lot of them had the same last name. And so that revealed with hard data that when families leave the CFA, that's a big risk. Whether that's a falling out the family's had or where the whole family moves away and, dad and the 3 sons were all members of the local brigade and all of a sudden you lose 4 old oaks in one go. And so this is good because from a succession planning point of view, it reveals hard data about the nature of the kind of changes we can experience from a knowledge perspective. And then finally, 2010, we started growing again, and then 2018 looking very, very healthy as a brigade there. So these captain changes do make a change. Also, the direction of the graph is important. So if it's going up, that means we have knowledge growth. If it's going down and to the left, that means we've got heavy knowledge loss. You can see through this 2010 era there, for 2 years, that brigade lost quite a bit of knowledge. When you see it going up and to the left, that means you're losing members but gaining knowledge. So whenever you see an up and to the left, like here, that means the captain's doing a cracker of a job. He's got training going on, he's got upskilling, he's got his smaller members doing more incidents, so they build up their knowledge and their experience. So we look for that. When you see that up left direction on the graph, they're the captains you want to be having mentor other brigades, get on the captain's peer mentoring program, that sort of stuff. And of course, when you see straight to the left, that usually means they're just culling the members who don't contribute much. And finally, when you see a down and to the right, that means you've got some old oaks leaving and they are recruiting, trying to refill the brigade. This is preparing for the next premiership, I like to call it. So the question is, doesn't training equal knowledge? If you train people more, wouldn't they be more knowledgeable? Well, when you've got data, you can ask that question. and we tried to use a scatter graph for this. And when you look at it from a district perspective, Adrian, are you 23 or 24? I think you're 24, right? Doesn't matter. You're right next to each other. 23 and 24 are right there. So you'd see that there's a general trend line there. The brigades that do more training do more accumulated knowledge. That's fair enough. However,
got a couple of quick questions for you, Stuart, just while we're doing
yeah,
there. It looks like
I
just wanted to get them in the meantime. That last graph was very popular, by the way. So the first question was from Michael. Michael, you got your hand up as well. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's in regards to this graph. I know you kind of brushed it off like everyone would know what graph it is, but I've got no idea which actual graph you're using to display there.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I found it by accident, but
it's a scatter graph with a play axis.
There you go. Scatter graph. It's that one.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg.
No worries. Yeah, so you can add a play axis to a scatter graph, Michael, and then it'll do this line tracking stuff. It's really cool. Stuart will show it in a sec.
Yeah, I'll give you a live demo in a sec.
We had another one from Richard. With the shapes of the charts being so important, are you giving each brigade an aggregate score, or is that representative of this curve? So
we calculate the aggregate score for each year. So each one of those dots is a year, right? So it changes over time.
Not on this chart, but on the chart before this of the brigade members.
Oh, brigade members, yeah. On the top left of this, I'm not showing the slicers, but there is a year slicer. So you can actually go back and look at previous years and see how it's changed over time.
But, yeah, not like that, but if for warning indicator, for instance, let's say you've got a brigade, or you've got a district that has 6 or 7 that are problematic, whereas you've got another district that only has 1 or 2 that are problematic. So how do you flag them as problematic, not problematic, in very good health, that kind of thing, without looking at each individual chart?
That's a good question. Can I take a rain check on that, because that's a future slide.
Cool, beautiful.
Awesome. Great questions. Also, a question, but I think Adrian answered it in the chat, around female captains and how many there are in the brigade or in the CFA.
Good stuff. I like female captains. They tend to be a little bit more balanced. That's probably sexist, but in my view, that seems to play out. From a knowledge perspective, I haven't done it, but what I have done is I've looked at the knowledge breakdown of gender across district, and we can certainly see that some districts have a more even knowledge distribution across the genders than other districts, and that's something that we're sort of benchmarking the districts against one another, so that some of those problematic districts can see where they stand against the others and maybe think about doing something about that. And the other thing we're not tracking here, because we're not allowed to keep data on it, which drives me nuts, is race. So one of the things we want to do is make sure that the brigades kind of reflect the communities they're in. And so if you have a brigade in, the western suburbs that's sitting in a largely Muslim area, then we would want a lot of Muslims in that brigade. If you've got a Hindu area, then we've got a lot of Tamils or whatever in that brigade. And unfortunately, I can't sort of report on that because I don't have the data, but that'd be lovely to see that we are, we have these as values, as aspirations. We want to get better at this, but I'm not sure we have the metrics to show the knowledge growth in those areas. So, and to be honest with you, though, some of the leaders aren't data experts, and knowledge does build over time. So you could be 50% women, for example, but they've only been there 4 to 5 years, whereas all the men have been there 50 years. And so it'll take years for the women to catch up, even though you're already a 50-50 split, if that makes sense. So knowledge is a dangerous metric because it can make it look worse than it is, in terms of what to do now. And the focus of this is very much on helping us lead and act better. And so if the data doesn't show something that's useful for how do I make a better decision in terms of managing these brigades, then not sure I want to show it.
Awesome. Okay, I think we're ready for the next bit.
Great. Okay. So we're talking about training versus knowledge, and we are a huge training organisation. And when I saw this, I was like, oh, that settles it. It really is training. The more training people do, the more knowledge they hold. Even though it's just one of the 4 metrics, there's a strong correlation. But then I thought, I'll have a look at it at the individual brigade level. And there's still a trend there, but 2 things stand out to me here. Number one, it's a lot more distributed than I thought it would be. You know, there's a big difference between this brigade here and this brigade here, or even that one and that one. So this one, very similar levels of training, and yet this one has what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 times the knowledge, even though it's had the same amount of training. So at the brigade level, things started to sort of spread out a little bit. So then I thought, I'm probably going to crash Power BI here, but let's have a look at it at the individual level. Let's look at 50,000 dots. And so I did that, and I got that. It turns out at the individual level, training and knowledge have very little to do with each other. And you can see here some of our highest knowledge holders in fact have the least amount of training. And this really confirms the fact that we can't just use training as a metaphor for knowledge at CFA. The amount of work they do, the turnouts they do, the experience they get through the mentoring and everything else really does play a huge part. And not to mention the incident knowledge, the actual turnouts that people do on a daily or weekly basis contributes massively. And this graph really tells an amazing story for me that knowledge isn't something we can just tick a box on. We need to engage our members and invest in them. And that doesn't involve just sending them on training courses and giving them a new pair of boots every now and then. We need to really focus on building a depth of expertise that can continue to be passed on. And now I'm not talking about capability today or next week. I'm talking about, can we still do a Black Saturday fire in 10 years' time? Yeah, that's not a given. I don't know whether you know the story, but somewhere in about the 3rd century, the human race as a whole lost the knowledge of how to make concrete. And we didn't rediscover it until they discovered Portland cement 300 years ago. So and I might point out, Your Honour, if you build a building out of Portland cement, 200 years later, it'll be rubble and dust on the ground. And yet the Parthenon is still standing, made of Roman cement. And so if we can lose as a human race the knowledge of how to make cement, something so important, you bet your bottom dollar we can forget how to put fires out. Okay, so yeah, obviously we've got high training, low knowledge, we've got high knowledge, low training, and of course knowing and learning. Right, so that question before, how do we just find the brigades that are in trouble? And so this is a graph showing our brigades that have had serious knowledge decline. And what this shows is the knowledge score this year versus the knowledge score 3 years ago. So if that difference is negative, they have less knowledge now than they did 3 years ago, then it turns red. And the redder it is, the worse the situation is. And so at a glance, the chief officer can see straight away which brigades need our attention. Yeah, the brigades are amazing. The people in them just want to share their knowledge so much that capability retention is kind of baked in. But when it goes wrong, it goes wrong. It's just like Microsoft Teams. When it works, it's awesome. But when it doesn't work, give up and try something else. So what we wanted was to show the leadership, these are the areas that need your attention. And that's really important, and I'll show you why. And this is where we get to talking about moving from measuring to predicting. And so if I show you this graph, from 2010 to 2014, this brigade lost 80% of its knowledge, and in 2015 they closed the brigade down. One person I talked to said that this was a political issue. Another one said that it happened overnight. But I'd like to point out, Your Honour, this brigade was in decay for 4 years. We could have predicted this change long before the brigade closed down and possibly done something about it. We have a brigade out in the east that over the last few years, you'll see they've had a bit of a drop off. They've gone from 38 members to 26. It's a small brigade out in the bush, but it's an important brigade because they are the brigade closest to the forest. They're the ones that respond first when the bushfire comes out near their patch. And it's up to half an hour before the second brigade turns up. They're that far away. So this is, you know, tactically a small brigade, but strategically an important brigade. And that drop off is not good. Not good. 26. It's not bad though. It's what? It's a 30% drop, maybe a 25% drop in people. So it's, with our traditional metrics at CFA, this is not something that would set off alarm bells. But let me show you the knowledge graph for that same brigade. Yes, we lost 13 people, but those 13 people held 65% of the brigade's knowledge. I give this brigade 2 years and it's gone. So when a commander looks at this, they go, oh, I'll give the captain a call, have a chat, take him out for a coffee. When a commander sees this, he's got alarm bells ringing all over the place. We need to transfer people in. We need to get them out with some other brigades doing some co-training nights. We need to get some of the local brigades up to their area doing some training so they know the tracks, so they know the forest, the gates. We'll make sure all the keys are updated, so if they do fall over and can't respond, then somebody else can do their job. Yeah? So contingency planning. This triggers good contingency planning. And so how many left? It's not how many, it's how much. That's the key. Who left is the key question here, and we haven't been tracking that. But this, for the first time, makes it very visible, and you can look at this for all your brigades in half an hour. The commander can just flick through their brigades and know exactly what's going on. Not just that, but the commanders are pretty cool themselves. And the couple that I spoke to, they could actually tell you the names of the people who left. So they really know their stuff. So in a way, this isn't just the brigade's capability we're protecting, but if one of those commanders was moved to the other end of the state or retired, then the new commander coming in wouldn't have the detailed personal knowledge of these brigades that the old commander had. And we want to, one of the things we talk about in knowledge management is reducing the time to competency. Yeah, that's a key metric for us. How quickly can you bring a brand new person up to be as competent as one of the old timers? And that's particularly important with our commanders because they play a key management role in CFA of keeping our brigades healthy and working well. And so when a new commander comes in or is promoted, or when an old commander moves on or is promoted, then we need to get the new people up and build their competency as quickly as possible. Any questions there?
A lot of love, no direct questions yet. If you've got a question, pop your hand up or chuck it in the chat. I got to say that, yeah, a lot of comments about how well you're using these scatter graphs to tell that data story, right? And just from a Power BI point of view, you know, Stuart's only showing one metric here, and he's just showing it in a few different ways, and just gives you an idea of how powerful, you know, this tool is overall in terms of being able to tell that story just for one metric, and then aggregating that data up.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that, Greg. The key word there is story, and Adrian will appreciate this. The numbers don't mean much. It's the conversation you have with the people. Yeah. And so these graphs weren't designed as a KPI. In fact, on the front page of this, I actually insist that they are not used as a KPI. These are there to sponsor and trigger conversations that matter across the organisation.
Yeah, so good. Sam Fisher, you got a question?
Yeah, that's really interesting, Stuart. I really like what you've done there, especially with the data storytelling aspect. What I'm kind of wondering is, you can, as far as Power BI, it's really cool to be able to put these kind of visuals together. But one thing that I often find interesting is trying to work out how to get the stakeholders to really pay attention, to really raise the alarm bells when they need to. And it sounds like you've done a really good job of getting the organization on board with being able to recognize when the alarm bell should go off. So I'm curious to know how are you able to educate the stakeholders who make these decisions around how to interpret these and really get the real power out of them?
So we have a really strong middle management structure at CFA and on the operations side. We have things called regional leadership teams, where all the ACFOs and DCOs come together for each region, and so I've been presenting this to a number of those, just giving them a taste of what's to come. We have another called BCPA, which uses Power BI to do analysis of the actual incident turnout and response, and it looks at brigade health in terms of what we do. This is the brigade health in terms of what they know. And so my goal is that the BCPA and this provide a binocular view. They give you a 3D view of the brigade. Does that make sense? So by having the operational, response view of what they did and what they know, you can start projecting into the future how much brigade support that brigade needs, where we can apply our things. And once the leadership team members get their head around that it starts to click. And so what I'm trying to do here is not just create a cool tool. When you talk to the commanders, they know their stuff. Like, they're really consummate professionals. And so all I'm doing here is I'm putting some numbers and some legs around stuff they already have in their head as hunches. Like, when you talk to a good commander, there is no surprises in this data. He knows everyone. He can name the people involved in the incidents when you see turn lines and all that sort of stuff. It's amazing how much they know. And they can talk back 10, 15 years. Like, it's really cool. We have some amazing people. But what I'm doing is I'm putting that data around it. So when they're trying to make a case to their ACFO, for example, that, hey, listen, I really need to take some resources and help these guys out, right? I know they're a small brigade, but they need the help. He's got this data backing him up. He can print this out and show it to the ACFO and say, have a look at this brigade. They really need our help. Well, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? And if the ACFO knows he's serious and he's doing it based on actual data, not just on, you're just mates with the first lieutenant, Not that would ever happen, but just as an example. So it also allows the ACFOs, who have no time for this, they're so busy, they got so much to manage, to look this far down into the depths of an individual brigade. We've got 1,200 brigades, is really hard to do. You just hear the odd rumor from the personal relationships you have, and of course the stuff coming up through your command leadership. Whereas this now allows an ACFO or even the chief to drill down and look at individual brigades and just get a quick snapshot of their health, both from a doing perspective and now a knowing perspective. So I'm hoping that, I don't have any authority. None of these people work for me. They don't have to do anything I tell them to do. My goal is to make a tool that's so useful, it's so helpful and enticing that they want to use it. And that's the same with all of my projects.
Okay, so just to kind of summarize how I've understood some of that, it sounds like you've been able to put some of what is already in the stakeholders' heads onto paper, but onto the computer so they can visually see it. And it sounds like you kind of built some credibility around that because they can see that matches what they understand to be, and then you've kind of taken it to the next level from there.
Exactly right. And that's why the ground testing was so important. So we built the proof of concept. We took it back out to the brigades and we talked to a number of districts and brigades and we said, tell us what you think of this. Let's look at a couple of the detailed ones that you know about. Went down and talked to the individual like training officers of brigades and got feedback from them so that we could fine tune this to represent reality. If it doesn't represent reality, forget it. It is intangible, but it's still real, right? Just intangible just means you can't put a dollar figure on it.
Mm. Questions are flying in now, Stuart. Hamza, you had a question.
Yes. So my question is that how do you zero in on the metrics to measure? Like what I have seen with BI, especially in my professional experience, is that people end up making so many reports that eventually you get lost in the report and nothing happened. You know, you see one chart and you see this chart and that chart, and in the end, you just sit down, leave it at the side, and make your decision. So how do you identify the metrics to measure here?
That's an awesome insight. And this is a big difference between me and the IT guys. For me, the greatest enemy of knowledge is information overload. And so, as Greg pointed out, I've only got 3 metrics here. There's only 3 reports. Yeah, and I don't want to overcomplicate this. The BCPA tool has something like 22 different reports in it. And some of them are so complex, unless you're an old timer, they're really hard to translate. Whereas this is I wanted to keep this very simple, succinct, and with like the directions of that graph to be able to tell a story that would start those conversations. I have personal problems with KPIs. I see the disproportionate cultural lashbacks that you get from using KPIs. I see the gaming of metrics that goes on, where people will do whatever it takes to increase the metric, not to do what's right for the organization. I've seen that over and over again in my career. And so for me, it's very much about informing people in a simple visual way so they can make sense of the data and information around them better.
Oh, preach. That is exactly my philosophy. We've got a question from Richard in the chat. Be keen to know if you link on-site accidents to knowledge levels and seeing if there's any correlation or anything missing that has a real-world impact.
What does on-site accidents mean?
I guess we're talking about any incident. So do you link incidents to knowledge in any way?
Yeah. So one of those 4 things we have is the turnouts. And what we do is we calculate a micro score for each incident that each individual attends, and then we boost that micro score if they are a driver at that incident. If they wear BA at the incident, we boost it. And this is going to sound funny, but Lynn will agree with me here. If they get injured, we multiply that score by 8.
Yeah, that's what I was getting towards, Stuart, in terms of accidents, as in who gets injured at an incident, who gets where there's a problem, where there's a truck rollover, where there's a truck fire burnover, those kind of incidents that occur on occasions. And it's good to have an understanding of the knowledge that people have and the training that people have, but is there something else? Is there enough of a correlation between those things and the lack of incidents, or is there actually something that's completely missing that your model hasn't taken account for that you need to find?
Yeah, so one of the things the model was missing, and you're right. I mean, a bit of research that was done in the UK years ago. Lynn's the genius on this. She might be able to tell me what the research was. But Dave Snowden mentioned that people learn 88 times more from a mistake than they do from a success. And so recognizing when things go wrong is really important. Secondly, just anecdotally, you and I, we know if you got injured, you don't just remember the injury, you remember everything about that day. You can say where you were driving. I've heard people say they remember what they were wearing. You know, your brain goes into super record mode somehow when something goes wrong. And so that's why we do that little boost. And it's one of the things that I didn't show you, but one of the things you can look at for each individual firefighter is the ratio of the knowledge scores. So you can see at any given time in their career what the ratio of was between role knowledge, incident turnout knowledge, training knowledge, and qualification knowledge. So some people you'll see all their knowledge comes from training. Other people it comes, my captain, for example, 50% of his knowledge comes from the role of captain and lieutenant, not from actually turning out to incidents. And yet, some of the, when you look at the highest knowledge holders, a lot of their knowledge is almost black. It's almost all incident-related knowledge. They've just done turnout after turnout, hundreds of turnouts a year for 10, 20 years. And their knowledge score is almost completely incident-related.
Sudashan, did you have a question?
So most of the, in my experience, what I've seen is it's good to show the reports to a person who understands the business, like, so if he has spent a lot of time, let's say, having the business knowledge. So in your experience, when a person joins CFA who has got no background of what CFA actually does, so how would you go about explaining him these reports? Like, so I suppose, what context would you give them in terms of making them understand what you guys, like, what these reports actually mean to them?
Yeah, sure. So 2 ways. Number one, on the first page, we have an instruction page that tells everyone what it's for and how it should be used and how it shouldn't be used. We make sure we say how it shouldn't be used. Number 2, remember I talked about that mentoring and helping train each other? That operates at the leadership level as well. They all work together. We have a captain's peer mentoring program, and also the commanders and that are in contact all the time. So so once we get the word out, the discussions continue on how to use the tool, and hopefully we'll get feedback from them on how they want to continue improving the tool. But yeah, that's pretty much how we do it. Trying to create that ongoing. But what you're talking about there also pertains to the time to competency of our middle management.
Yep.
How do we get them up to speed quickly?
Correct. Yep. Because sometimes, like, so if you're not from the same background, it could be completely understood in a different way to a person who spent a lot of time within the business.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, you do need to be very careful about that. And I think a misread metric is worse than no metric at all. So yeah. I'm very, very careful of that for that reason.
Adrian has his hand up. Adrian.
Yeah, no worries. I might just add a little bit with Stuart here and noting this is a Power BI. So really a little bit of background with CFA is that, so for myself as the Assistant Chief Fire Officer here in District 24, my background is a trade background, trained as a firefighter, come through the career structure in CFA type thing. And I suppose you inherit, we do a bit, I would say a reasonable amount now of leadership and people management type stuff when you move into these more of the leadership or middle management type roles. Our people are the key thing, and really we've got the organisation is data rich, but we've never really been able to show it in a context that just makes it very simple for our background of being firefighters first and people managers second. We're not taught, we're starting to be identified now, but not taught anything in business management. I have a bit of a personal background in business management, and I decided some gaps there in the role that I take on now through promotion that I actually decided 2 years ago about undertaking an MBA, so Master of Business Admin, to add to that. So I'm a bit of the new generation, I suppose, assistant chiefs coming through, and a bit of this will take time. So to have someone like Stuart on board, passionate about this knowledge, and be able to show it in a 5-minute schematic and on the back of what the commanders and the ACFOs know on their brigades, really just cements that way. And in the comments, I've just been adding a couple of times there, Stuart, you'll see later on that the BCPA works with our annual brigade review, and I've been a big believer in that, which also very much in this business planning Power BI product. And we'll get that, will inform our business and work going forward. So it's not just about fire trucks getting out the door. We do that really well, but there's a whole range of other health issues in a brigade. And in a lot of cases, CFA is the last thing left in a lot of communities too. So certainly in regional and rural areas. So I'll just add that in there for a bit of context for everyone on board.
That's great. Thanks, Adrian.
Very good. Oh, we got one more from Hamza. Thanks, Hamza.
Well, I just want to apologize that I'm asking too many questions, but my question is that like how do you like you use 3 matrix here now, so how do you like when they call you in, how did you decide what matrix to focus on, and how do you conclude that these are the 3 that are the most important ones? Like what's your process?
Okay. Great question. So I know what I want you all to do after this meeting is to Google a thing called Cynefin. So that's CYNEFIN. And the Cynefin framework talks about, Adrian, you might come across this in your MBA. It talks about the domains of problem spaces. And so you've got simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. So it's based on chaos theory or complexity theory. And what I recognized was that a lot of the problems we had, because they were people-based, sat in the complex domain. So the appropriate way to approach the complex domain is to probe, sense, and respond. So I probed by building a proof of concept based on the data I had available. And then I kept playing and playing and playing until something looked like it made sense. And then I exposed it to the environment, because when you expose it, the first time they just react to it. But when you have a couple of backwards and forwards, it starts to change the way they think, and then they come back to you with new ideas and everything else. So it's important to have that time frame. And this has taken 12 months to go through this, because it's the best example I can give you is the freeway, right? Mr. Brax says, we need an extra lane on the southeastern. And so what we're going to do is, we can't afford that. We're going to take out a loan to build an extra lane. So we've got 100,000 cars a day on the southeastern. And so if we charge them $10 a day, that's $1 million a day. That's how much money we can loan, because we can pay it off $1 million a day. Sounds simple, right? And that is simple. The problem is, it's a complex problem. There's human beings involved. So they turned the toll gates on, and it dropped to 80,000 a day because 20,000 people didn't want to pay the toll. Does that make sense? That's a complex problem. And so by just picking something and dumping it out there, thinking that's the end result, that's a very bad way to approach a complex problem. But picking something and just trying it out there is an awesome way to handle a complex problem. And that's what we did. It's been iterative. It's been backwards and forwards. Like I said, 3 different districts, 12 odd different brigades, lots of individuals right around the organisation, talking this through, having fantastic conversations, really listening to the feedback I was getting, which would lead me down another rabbit hole and I'd find something else out. And it caused me to ask myself different questions about the problem I was trying to solve here. But I guess you could say I was exploring the problem space and then landing and amplifying the things that seemed to resonate with the people who had to use it. I hope that makes sense. It's not too academic.
Yes, yes, it perfectly do. Thank you.
So the question I'm going to ask you guys is, what operational metrics are the leaders in your organisation using to measure success? You know, do they highlight or do they obscure the knowledge assets and the knowledge risks in your organisation? And if the smallest thing you can do out of tonight is to just have a look at your current metrics and just think, do these make managing our knowledge easier to do or harder to do because it gets lost in the noise? And just doing that will take you a long way forward. So just to finish off, our new era, you know, it unlocked a whole new field of biology. It paved the way to genetic treatments, identification of people alive and dead. Our new area, we're hoping to see a new level of connection and collaboration and innovation at all levels and across all districts of the CFA. It's a big vision. Who knows how much of it we'll be able to achieve, but we can't do it without having the right buy-in from the key people, understanding the nature of the problem. And that's what this Power BI tool has tried to expose. That history of the of the brigade. And when I showed this to the captain of that brigade, he's a funny guy. He's actually missing a leg, and he was actually hopping from his leg to his artificial leg backwards and forwards. He was so excited to see this data telling the story of his brigade, and that's what I'm looking for. The numbers are good, but I want that emotional connection that, yes, this is who we are. This is connecting with me at a deep level, not just a cognitive one, you know. So that's really good. And there's the play axis there. So you can see this graph. I've just dragged the year down into that play axis, and that's what gives us this animation potential.
That's so awesome. Yeah. So yeah, that's just a standard scatter graph. You'll see the visualization when he's got selected there. It's just the standard scatter graph. You can add a play axis into that and get that kind of Hans Rosling commentate the little circle as it goes along.
I may or may not have stolen the idea from him.
Yeah, I love it too. Yeah. I think we're getting pretty short on time, so I'm not sure if you had much more content.
Oh, that's it.
Stuart.
I'm all done.
Oh, perfect.
So,
well,
unless you've got some questions or whatever, I'm good.
Question time. We've got one from Scott. Scott, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, look, and it's probably not so much a question, but a huge thumbs up. And I'm one of those excited captains dancing from feet to feet. And just in terms of applicability, I'm from the north of the border. So
cool.
In New South Wales, an RFS captain, as well as working in fire management for national parks. So lots of applicabilities, but I mean, those graphs tell stories for me about your brigades. So I don't think you even need to have CFA knowledge to understand those graphs. You just need to understand volunteers and how it works to see that those graphs really work, and they are super exciting. You've got some very lucky volunteers for being able to see that data on a semi-regular basis.
That's great. Thank you. Well, that's my cocaine, right? When I hear the volunteers and that come back and say, man, you helped us so much. We're doing a new contact search solution, which is launching next week, and we demoed it today in the Southeast. And just to hear them coming back and saying, oh my gosh, do you realize that's going to save me 4 hours a week, every week? You know, they're the sort of things I love as a knowledge manager to hear, because it means that we're making a real difference on the ground. I know there's knowledge managers that do like records management or succession planning, and I'm lucky at CFA because we've got teams to look after those things. So I get to focus on operational knowledge, and that's what I'm really passionate about. I come from oil and gas and from water and sewer background and medical technologies, where it's about saving lives and helping society. So I'm super excited to be working here at CFA. It's an amazing organisation.
Yeah, look, and I just wish as an organisation in national parks we had the data to do a similar kind of process. We've probably only got 50 or 60% of the data that we need to do it. But it's something that we've struggled with long term about trying to, map that loss and succession over time, and making sure that we're keeping up with that and selling our senior management on the fact that it's not just the number of people qualified in any given qualification that makes the difference.
I love that you point that out, and this is one of the evils of Agile, that you only develop for what you have a need for right now. And I see so many Agile created databases today that are missing what to me are obvious data points that you'd want to capture and track over time, because it wasn't needed for that project at the time. And yet you'd done all the work. All you had to do was add the extra 2 bits, but you decided not to collect them. And then you come to something like this where Power BI gets released. Suddenly you have the ability to visualize big data, and sorry, you don't have the data. So I sit here as the face of CFA tonight, but trust me, all I did was put a pretty window on the front of it. The real credit for this goes to the people who have been collecting this data. After every incident, the captain or somebody at the brigade has to call through all of the details of that fire, of that incident. And they've been doing that for several decades now on a very faithful basis. I work with the team, the first team that takes those calls and puts them into the database. And the stuff they know, it's amazing. And so I'm really just surfing on that data. So if, that's a really good point that, if you have any influence, it would be to collect this data. You never know what you're going to need it for. And there is a tendency in government, especially, not to store stuff because of privacy laws. But those privacy laws are massively over applied in a lot of cases. And so I encourage you, don't be shy about capturing a few extra things with, future use in mind.
Yeah, just from a technology perspective, talking about, the way that there's an opportunity to capture data. I was talking to a customer today about, well, we're going to put in some cheap storage and just capture this random data, snapshots of data into just a file, just to hold for now. We're not using it for any active reporting, but we know that at some point someone's going to want to, point a data scientist at that, try and capture that, get some insight out of that data. You never know. And storage is really cheap from a technology perspective. Throw those CSV files in a dump somewhere, protect it obviously and secure it, and then you've got the data for this kind of insight in the future.
So let me give an example of that quickly and we'll close on this. Our CFA search was absolutely terrible. So one of the things I did last year is I launched a new Elastic-based enterprise search across the organisation, and the usage of that has been fantastic. Over 1,500 hits a day from volunteers, which is great. But one of the things we are storing, and for privacy reasons, we're not allowed to store who searched for what. But what we are storing is the attributes of who did the search against each search. So we know if it was a commander or if it was a captain or if it was a firefighter that searched for that term. We also know what district they searched from. In the future, we're also going to store things like, what was the temperature on the day you did that search? And another one I'd really like to have is, were they moving or not? Did their phone show that they were in motion at the time of the search? And we're going to use that. So we're not using that data yet, but we're storing it because we're looking at implementing a graph database to drive our search. And that graph database will take those things into account. So if I search for asbestos, then it's going to give me the joint standard operating procedure on asbestos. But if I search for asbestos and I'm in motion, i.e. probably in the back of a truck, it's going to serve up the asbestos handling procedure. Does that make sense? Same search, different results based on whether you're moving or not. But if we don't store the data for that graph to make sense of, then the graph is stupid. It'll start off so dumb that it'll give results all over the place. So we're collecting that sort of data. So for example, if I'm a firefighter and I search for something, I'll get one result. But if I'm a commander, I might pick the fourth thing down. If I have 3 or 4 commanders clicking on the fourth thing down, then the graph, when a commander searches for that thing, is now going to put that as the #1 result, voted by commanders near you. Okay, yeah. So that's just an example of storing data that you don't necessarily need yet, but will help you, with future AI tools, with Azure, with Watson, whatever it is, to be able, or Neo4j we're looking at, to give a much better result for our people on the ground so they can do their search, get the answer, and get back to whatever they're doing, especially if that thing they're doing is saving lives and putting out fires.
That's awesome. Well, I think everybody in the chat and everybody who's been here, we had 70 people on the call. So really, really appreciate the time that you've taken, Stuart, to show us that. Beautiful application of Power BI, simple, very clear, tells the story. I think you will have inspired a lot of people in the call tonight. Thanks to the guys from the CFA and the other fire authorities who have joined the call as well. It's really good to see the insight from your perspective that this stuff makes sense to you as well, and so we appreciate that, and everybody else. Good to see you all again next month. Same bat channel, same bat time next month. Feel free to hang around, have a chat. I'm not going anywhere, so yeah, if you guys want to have a chat. Otherwise, thank you. Put your thanks to Stuart, obviously. Really appreciate. Feel free to unmute yourself and say thanks, and we'll see you next time, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely
Thanks,
awesome. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Scott, feel free to reach out to me, mate.
Sorry, reaching for the mute. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think it would be really, really good. I work in the lessons management team in national parks, so
Oh, sweet. Well, we definitely need to talk.
yeah. Look, and that's we're all in that space of learning. It was actually Bert who put me onto the workshop here through his connection. So. Yeah, look, avid BI kind of hacker like you as well, taking stupid ideas and trying to turn them into visualizations. I've had a lot of success, yeah, trying to pull together data from really silly, different, disparate places into common visualizations. And I think having the subject matter expertise about what you're trying to visualize makes a huge difference. You know, it's that rapid kind of deployment cycle, I guess, of no, that doesn't make sense because I know that's wrong. So yeah, look, I think in a national parks context, we'd have to collect some more data, but this is hugely across succession management, lessons management, and our capability is all in one team that I work inside national parks. So yeah, this is squarely up our alley. So yeah, we'll definitely make contact, and we might need to get you to do a presentation at some point, I think. And
yeah, be happy to. No worries at all.
Inspire some people.
Can do. No, I've just put my email in the chat there, so if you want to grab that, and, happy to catch up. I can see the difference this is starting to make at CFA. So if other organisations can lean off that and take more of a knowledge focus rather than an IT focus, let me give you one more report, then all the better for everyone.
Yeah, well, look, and anything that doesn't involve IT in our context is usually a good thing. So, yeah. Luckily, we hold most of the data, but yeah, we're just starting some really interesting projects about warehousing our fire skills data, like data warehousing and matching it in with other organisational and RTO training data and that kind of stuff.